The government of Nigeria has been nursing plans to generate power through the use of uranium. Nigeria announced they were embarking on energy generation through nuclear materials such as uranium, and since the plan became public, it is almost clear that the energy generation process seems a bit unclear. It is no secret that there are natural uranium deposits in 6 Nigerian states currently, which are Taraba, Adamawa State, Cross River State, Plateau State, Bauchi, and Kano State, and the availability sort of makes it ideal as an available source of energy. So many countries and stakeholders around the world are watching Nigeria closely on its energy generation and probably the use of uranium and some other elements that could be used for the production of weapons of mass destruction. However, one reason we are not supposed to be worried about this development is that the International Atomic Energy Agency, the international body that monitors the peaceful use of nuclear energy, has approved the move and declared minimal access risk. According to a comment made by a senior nuclear security officer, he said, "As a matter of fact, I believe Nigeria is a good nuclear partner, and that is why the agency is here to see how they can assist in uranium extraction." He doesn't actually believe that Nigeria will actually use uranium for the production of weapons of mass destruction. Another thing to look at is that the uranium mined in Nigeria may or may not be sufficient to constitute a security or health hazard like cancer, kidney and heart diseases and the rest. To be honest, it would be good if the proposed alternative power generation sees the light of the day, considering the fact that we are using a readily available mineral resources aside crude oil for something tangible. However, certain questions still remain in the minds of Nigerians. Some of them are even asking what happened to the coal deposit in Enugu State. Are the hydroelectric dams broken? Is renewable energy no longer an option? All these billions that will be budgeted for the uranium power project could be channeled into existing sources. To achieve this, the government invited experts from the International Atomic Energy Agency to conduct a one-week training for nuclear practitioners as well as security officers in the country on the extraction, exploitation and utilization of the substance. The government also announced it was working towards generating about 4,000 megawatts of electricity using nuclear energy. It stated then that the plan was to start a program in the coming years that will give the country a 1,000 megawatts in the first instance, which will be increased to 4,000 megawatts thereafter. The Nigerian government has approved and launched its energy transition plan, setting out the pathway to achieving its net zero target by 2060. The energy transition plan aims to focus on emission reduction across various sectors, including the oil and gas and power sectors, to drive economic growth and lift over 100 million people out of poverty. For the power sector, it is envisaged that the emission will be reduced by substituting natural gas with solar energy. Surprisingly, the energy transition plan, however, made no mention of utilizing nuclear energy as a means of generating electricity to further reduce emission, despite its potential as the second largest source of low-carbon electricity behind hydropower. Nuclear electricity is generated through fusion, which is the process of splitting uranium atoms to produce energy. The heat released by fission is used to create steam that spins a turbine to generate electricity without the harmful byproduct emitted by fossil fuels. In comparison to other clean energy sources, a typical 1,000 megawatt nuclear facility requires less than 1 square mile to operate, while solar plant requires 75 times the space to produce the same volume of electricity. The omission of nuclear energy from the energy transition plan is confounding, particularly given the federal government of Nigeria's earlier announcement of a bid to process the construction of a 4,000 megawatt nuclear power plant as part of its plans to bridge the energy gap in the country. The omission of nuclear generation of electricity from the energy transition plan may have been promised on the challenges associated with deploying nuclear power, such as lack of clear regulatory framework. The regulatory space for the use of nuclear power in Nigeria is presently unclear to adequately address the risks facing potential investors. There presently exist multiple regulatory agencies with overlapping responsibilities, such as the Nigerian Nuclear Regulatory Authority, formed in 1995 under the Nuclear Safety and Radiation Protection Act, and is statutorily charged with the responsibility for nuclear safety and radiological protection regulation in Nigeria. The agency began operation in 2001 and has subsequently developed regulations pertaining to nuclear energy, including basic ionizing radiation regulations issued in 2003, as well as issued several other regulations for transporting radioactive sources, the safety and security of radioactive sources, and the safety of industrial radiography, nuclear medicine, and radiotherapy. It also implements international best practices as contained in the International Basic Safety Standard for protection against ionizing radiation and the International Basic Safety Standards. The Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission is also charged with the technical and commercial oversight of the electricity supply industry in Nigeria, and the National Environmental Standard and Regulations Enforcement Agency is charged with oversight and enforcement of environmental laws. Clarity around the licenses and permits of the construction of nuclear power plants will help provide investors with a degree of certainty on project life, which is key for bankability and financing of any nuclear power project. There are also several treaty obligations, some of which have been ratified, such as the IAEA Convention on Nuclear Safety, the 1986 Convention on Early Notification of Nuclear Accidents, the revised supplementary agreement concerning the provision of technical assistance by the IAEA, and the 1968 Convention on Assistance in case of a nuclear accident or radiological emergency. There are also several treaties and conventions to which Nigeria must be a signatory for it to be eligible to develop nuclear power, and this remains outstanding. The ensuing dichotomy of federal and state regulations of electricity sector will further model the regulations and the use of nuclear power. To be able to utilize nuclear power in attaining its net zero promise by 2060, there is clearly a need for clarity around the legal and regulatory framework, particularly around licenses and permits applicable to the construction of nuclear power plants. This will help provide investors with a degree of certainty on project life, which will be key for the bankability and financing of any nuclear power project. Nuclear power plant projects typically have long time horizons in terms of construction and testing. However, there are some new technologies such as the sealed microreactors, which are small reactors with capacities of 10 MW or less that have the potential to operate up to 10 years without the need for refueling, and small modular reactors or SMRs, which have a capacity of up to 300 MW and are often built off-site, lowering construction times and costs. The flexibility and limited capacity of SMRs allows for their deployment on or off-grid. The construction timeline and ease of deployment of SMRs will certainly allow for a faster reduction of emission in the Nigerian electricity supply industry. One modular could power a whole state once connected to the transmission company of Nigeria grid. Hospitals and schools could also run off micro modules, which should make the solution attractive to states seeking to develop their own independent electricity grid. To be candid, the present transmission infrastructure in Nigeria is not adequate to support nuclear electricity generation. Nuclear power plants operate continuously at base load or full capacity, which means the grid must be able to transmit a sufficient multiple, or typically 10 times, of the production capacity of the nuclear plant. Significant investment is therefore needed for the upgrade of the existing grid for the evacuation of nuclear generated electricity. Lack of local maintenance expertise for any nuclear power plant built will be a major cause for concern safety-wise, and clear and purposeful training of local workforce will be especially important in deployment of nuclear power. So any nuclear power focused agenda must necessarily include robust training provisions. The advantages of infusing nuclear electricity generation into the NESI as a means of decarbonizing the power sector are clearly significant, and Nigeria will be prudent to key into these advantages. To do this, however, there must be a clear strategy for an integrated energy system. For the net zero emission plan to succeed, there is a need for an integrated planning of Nigeria's entire energy system that takes cognizance of various sources of clean energy, including nuclear power, which will help deliver efficient, reliable, and cost-effective energy to reduce poverty. To this end, there is a need for the harmonization of various energy policy frameworks being developed and pursued by different ministries, departments, and agencies.